This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? Thanks, guys. Back to you.
I may or may have not had a beer before I sat down to do this. It's going to be great listening to this back on replay. I'm tired. It's been a day. But I learned a valuable lesson. Do not check your phone while driving. It'll eventually come back to bite you. Could have been a lot worse. Really could have. But if you take anything away from the show today, learn that lesson. Take it with you. So, this is the Five Starr Wrestling Report. Welcome to everybody that is coming back to check the show out today. Mondays and Fridays here on YouTube and Rumble. The way God intended. Before we get started here, I just want to take a few minutes to update you for the weekend. There's no Retro Raw coming up because they're still on that delay or whatever it is. The preempted episode. So this weekend will be Retro NXT and then WWE's Bash in Berlin. Or whatever the premium live special is called. So that'll be for the Monday show. Next week will be the regular Friday podcast. And I think we'll resume to normalcy the weekend after. No promises, though. Today, though, got the regular classic rundown. Crockett TV, Mid-South, World Class. Pretty normal schedule. And the shows seem to run the regular length of time, too. So we'll get diving into this one. Of course, we'll always start with Crockett Promotions first here. And I think I figured out this trilogy of cold opens with Brad Armstrong and Al Perez. I'm not having a stroke. They are, in fact, replaying snippets of a TV angle from the Sunday syndicated program. Why they felt the need to stretch out the footage over a series of 3 weeks instead of just playing the thing in full, I have no idea. Apparently, they have run out of stock footage. So this is the best they could come up with. The first week, it was Gary Hart interfering. Then we came back the following week and saw Kevin Sullivan getting involved. We saw what appeared to be a chain that came into play. And this week we can confirm. Yes, it was a chain that Perez wrapped around Brad's neck. That was 3 weeks of build-up to get to this point. The payoff. Al Perez chokes Brad Armstrong with a stationary chain. So I guess next week, part 4, we'll have a bunch of baby faces emptying out from the locker room to make the save. They are really trying to make a big deal out of this beating on Brad Armstrong. I don't think I've ever seen them spend this much time lingering on Dusty Rhodes footage. But it has been some riveting episodic television, I'll tell you. Find out what happens in the next installment of Brad Armstrong's confrontation with Al Perez and Kevin Sullivan. Will he survive the wrath of the chain? Well, I sure hope so, because we've seen nothing but boring squashes out of him for the last 3 years. I mean, this is easily the best thing Brad's done on TV. So among the many things they were promoting for this week's show, the big one that stuck out was the announcement that Ron Garvin had sustained rib injuries at the hands of Dusty, and that he was going to be out of action for 4 to 6 months. Right. They just forgot to mention that little detail that 4 to 6 months would be forever, because he left the promotion after this and went to the WWF. Whoops. Because they figured no one would notice. And now he's an accomplished car salesman from what I hear. Also a certified pilot. Hey, good on him, man. He dipped out of wrestling altogether and said, well, this shit's going to hell in a handbasket. I'm going to open up my own car dealership and make bank. And Jimmy eventually followed suit. So the first match on this week's show was Ricky Morton and Nikita Koloff versus Jerry Price and Max MacGyver. The short-lived random makeshift pairing of Ricky and Nikita that nobody ever talks about. Even JR here was like, I don't know how long these guys plan on joining forces. The answer was just long enough for Ricky to get fed up with Crockett again. So not very long. Big thing here was them drawing attention to the history of the Russians and the Rock and Roll Express, back when they feuded a few years ago. So Ricky and Nikita knew each other very well. Now they've put their differences aside for the sake of bettering their careers. Because somehow they thought teaming up would better their careers. Match was relatively boring. Nikita got the win on Price with the Russian sickle. I don't believe MacGyver tagged in one time during this match. He just stood on the apron and watched his partner get wrecked. Easy payday for MacGyver, I guess. And then they did a promo afterwards. Neither guy had anything constructive to say. Nikita said there are a lot of teams he and Ricky want to face in the NWA. Then he struggled to come up with more than 2 teams to talk about. And Ricky called out Paul Jones. Mentioned something about how Paul was trying to use him as a guinea pig for Ivan Koloff to beat up and make an example out of. Now, of course, let me backpedal for a minute here. They had taped everything out of order on the show. So Ricky cut this promo initially. I had no idea what the guy was talking about. Now, when they aired the Paul Jones promo after this, it made more sense. But here I was like, what the hell is Ricky going on about? And God, he sounded about as enthused as a get-well car from an Undertaker. And I'm not talking about The Undertaker. Because even Taker had more personality than Ricky Morton did during this promo segment. This guy was here to pick up a paycheck, dude. He was over it. And then we came back for the Russian Assassin versus Bret Holiday. This is far more entertaining than it had any right to be. Mainly because Bret Holiday fucking sucks. So watching him bumble around with the Assassin here was a joy to witness. His fucking tits bouncing all over God's green earth. Grotesque. I still can never get over when Paul blatantly interferes right in front of Teddy the whole time. All Teddy can do is walk over and go, "Hey, Paul, cut that out, man." Because, like, well, after all, what the hell is he going to do? Disqualify the Assassin? Actually grant the win to Bret fucking Holiday? Even Teddy didn't have that much sympathy. So the assassin eventually went over with a guillotine choke. It was equally hilarious watching in slow motion as the assassin shaking Brett Holiday around with his clutch hold. And Brett's entire body looked like a can of raw dough, just flopping all over the goddamn place. It is the funniest thing when I get to make fun of the fat jobbers on this show. It warms the cockles of my heart. It actually gives me hope that maybe I have a chance to someday make it in wrestling. Me and my scrawny 135-pound ass. I am in much better shape than the studio jobbers were back in the day. Tell you that much. The highlight of the whole thing was a post-match promo with Paul Jones. Beyond glorious. So Jones and the assassin are over at the booth. Of course, David's asking for clarity on the whole situation with Uncle Ivan. Why is Paul disparaging Ivan Koloff and throwing him under the bus? And the answer is quite simple. Ivan dishonored Paul Jones and the Paul Jones Army. He failed to get rid of the Road Warriors. He failed to live up to Paul's expectations. And if Ivan wants to redeem himself, he needs to prove that he can eliminate another All-American that Paul Jones despises. None other than Ricky Morton. Ah. So now that makes sense. Based on Ricky's promo earlier when he called out Paul Jones. So as Paul's ripping into Ricky here, he comes out and confronts both heels of the booth, getting in Paul's face and telling him that he refuses to be a piece of meat for anybody, including Ivan. He'll accept Ivan's challenge to a Russian chain match. Pause. Who said anything about a Russian chain match? Did that stipulation ever cross the mouth of Paul Jones during this promo? I don't believe it did. So now Ricky's just making up gimmick matches on the fly. All I know is this promo was awesome because Ricky referred to the Russian assassin here as, and I quote, a big piece of vegetable. A big piece of vegetable. Sure. We'll go with that theory. I don't know what that means. But we'll presume Ricky meant that as an insult. And then the real highlight. As Paul Jones tries to act all tough by removing his jacket and slamming it on the podium, the assassin's restraining him as Paul's trying to throw a fit. David Crockett just casually goes, wow, he's mad now. He's really mad. This was so fucking marvelous. The moment Paul took off the jacket and slammed it on the counter, I was like, the shit's on now, brother. Now you gone done and made number one Paul Jones angry. Next time we see him on camera, he'll be out there with the Hitler attire again. He'll probably have Tijo Gijo and Baron von Raschko back out there. And it'll be 1986 all over again. The glory period, baby. If only. And then we had another great segment after break. I mean, this show is really starting to give off 1986 vibes in hour one. Multiple spectacular segments back to back here. Shifting gears to the secondary big feud on the program. We have Jim Ross at the booth setting up the story, the footage we were about to see here. As he's talking about all-time sports grudges and bitter rivalries. The big rivalry right now is the Midnights and the Four Horsemen. The unexpected rivalry that a lot of people never saw coming. And while things started off relatively tame with snide pot shots and sarcastic remarks, now it's really gotten heated. Now the Horsemen have made it personal. So we go to a film on the Sunday syndicated program where Stan's out there wrestling a singles match. I always forget the job guy's name. He's the one that actually looks like he goes to a gym 5 times a week. But Stan's out there working with him. And while Jim Cornette's calling the action with Bob Caudle, Teddy Long runs down and lets Corny know that Bobby Eaton's been jumped in the locker room. And the insinuation here is that Tully and Arn were responsible for it. So as Cornette draws Stan's attention to it, they both charge toward the locker room. And we see Bobby down on the ground with a bloody eye. He was not unconscious, but he was banged up pretty considerably. And that dovetails into the Midnight's promo here where, they basically turned babyface on camera and called out the Horsemen. JC says that once upon a time, beautiful Bobby would have given Arn the shirt on his back. And while the Horsemen had a reputation for jumping guys in the parking lot and leaving their mark on top of names in the industry, this time, they done fucked up. Because now they jumped on somebody who's going to jump back. Of course, I got a monstrous babyface pop. Corny says this time, the Horsemen drew first blood. But the next time, the Midnights are going to return the favor in full. To which Stan gets on the mic, cuts probably one of the best promos we've heard out of him, saying the only thing the Horsemen proved by attacking Bobby is that they're scared little punks. They know they can't handle the job in a 2-on-2 situation. And the next time the Horsemen are standing across the ring for the Midnights, the 4 Horsemen are going to be looking like horses you-know-whats. Which is a good line. But the buck didn't stop there. Because Bobby Eaton gets on the stick. And he cuts a damn fine promo himself. Beautiful Bobby Eaton. Christ almighty, I forgot that guy could actually talk. I've only heard a handful of Bobby promos when he was down in Memphis. So I know he at least could talk to some degree. It's not like he was an amateur when it came to somebody putting a microphone in front of his face. But this is one of the few times we've seen Bobby do a full-length promo here on the show. A standalone promo by himself. Nobody calling the shots. And he was great. Fucking phenomenal. Saying that he's been getting his butt kicked in wrestling since he was 16 years old. But he's never stayed down after getting hurt in a fight. He's always gone back up, dusted himself off, came back throwing punches. And the next time the Midnights are standing toe-to-toe with the Horsemen, they're going to wish they looked as good as Bobby does right now when they get through with them. And of course, the big thing that stands out here, the reason it was so outstanding, these people have been watching Bobby Eaton on this show for 3.5 years. They've never heard this guy speak long form on the program before. This is the first time we've actually seen Bobby talking to a mic by himself. Nobody else to do the promo for him. So they saw JR hold the mic up to Bobby here and thought, holy shit. Well, we got to hear what this guy has to say. He never has anything to say. And you know what? They went dead silent. And Bobby just ripped into the Horsemen. He neutered them on the stick. Delivered a banger go-home line. These people went ballistic after Bobby talked. It's like the studio audience popping for a baseball player hitting his first career home run. They were so proud of beautiful Bobby here. And he finished up and everyone went, yeah, fuck yeah, dude. Way to go, brother. You knocked it out of the park. I mean, how could you not cheer these guys after this promo? I mean, they definitely cemented a babyface turn. I don't think anybody could argue that. And again, I've been very vocal about how I was not the biggest fan of the babyface Midnight's Express run. I thought JC in particular lost a little bit of his mystique when it came to him as an on-screen good guy. Like, his promos just never hit home the same. But this was really damn fine promo work. I mean, they got done talking here, and I was like, go get them, boys. Go kick Tully and Arn's butts. They deserve it. So I can't deny it got over in the room. And this is one of the best things we've seen out of the Midnights all year. I mean, everybody was on fire in the segment. God, if they would have made this the last thing on the whole show, I mean, this probably would have won Best Wrestling Show of the Year. Man, now that I'm raving about it again, I really need to go back and rewatch it just to prove to myself how great it was. And then we came back for a Florida heavyweight title bout. Rick Steiner defending against Keith Steinborn, which I'm convinced was them intentionally fucking with Steinborn. I was laughing my ass off the entire time this match is going down. I could just see the idea that Steinborn hears that he's getting a title shot on the program, and then he realizes he has to wrestle Rick Steiner. He's like, all of a sudden I'm not too eager about that title match. I mean, Rick is out there just toying with the guy, making him look like the biggest jackass on planet Earth. The very first spot he does, he picks Steinborn's legs and just openly mocks the guy. Just grabs him and drops him. Doesn't even follow up with anything. He's just like, you piece of shit. And my favorite spot here, in addition to him grabbing Steinborn by his braided ponytail and then tossing him around, at one point, he deadlifts Steinborn up into a pile driver position, just drops the guy straight down on his fucking head. Just killed him. I was like, well, now I definitely know Rick is legitimately trying to murder a man. It really is hard to tell with Rick because he's such a loose cannon. But, he was definitely aiming to end Steinborn's life here. I'm convinced of it. So, after he had fun toying around, Rick eventually won with a belly-to-belly. And just when I thought the show was really cooking, just when I was really getting soaked in, I was like, you know what? This is one of the best Crockett episodes I've reviewed all year so far. Well, then they took the air out of the room by making me sit through Al Perez and Gary Royal. And that is when I realized, yep, we are right back to 1988 reality. Perez did boring wrestling holds and then one with a spin toe hold. And we had J.J. Dillon at the booth for a promo. He really said a lot of words without saying much of anything. That was my big takeaway from all this. I mean, David's trying to ask about Barry Windham and the feud with Sting for the U.S. heavyweight title, which JJ addresses by not talking about Barry Windham or Sting. He addresses the Horsemen Midnight's feud. He says that his men are looking down on everybody else on the roster because they have the important gold. Yet at the same time, he also explains that Barry Windham is still a notch below Flair and the Horsemen, which didn't make a lick of sense. It was kind of a nut shot. In any case, he warned the Midnights to watch their backs because they're so focused on the Horsemen and the World Tag Belts, they're forgetting about all the teams gunning after the U.S. tag straps. And then at the very end, when David tried to bring up the idea that the Horsemen are afraid of the Midnights, JJ goes, The only thing I'm afraid of is that I might have to hire somebody to count all the money I'm making. Which was a good heel line. That was clever. But yeah, the promo was completely pointless. And then we had Tully and Arn versus Brad Holiday and Gordon Lee Ramsay. So, I don't even know how long into the match this was. It was a long-ass TV squash. And I know that probably sounds like there was a lot to talk about considering Tully and Arn were working here. No, the truth is there was nothing to say about it at all. Tully and Arn just beat up two worthless job guys for about 10 minutes and won with a finish. With that said, about halfway through the match, they put the studio cam on somebody in the audience. We were told this was a gentleman from Tokyo, that he traveled all the way from Tokyo to come see the NWA in Atlanta. I mean, the name, I was not even going to try to pronounce it. As far as I know, I think it was just a fan. There was no graphic for him. If he was a celebrity, they did not establish it on commentary at all. It was just the most random thing on the entire show. Right in the middle of a Horseman squash, the announcers are casually just like, oh yeah, and here's so-and-so from Tokyo, Japan. Flew all the way across the country to come watch the superstars on the Superstation. And I was like, okay. Why? I mean, I guess it'd be one thing if they had like a top Japanese name working in the company around this time. Like Hiro Matsuda, I don't think he comes in until well into early 89. So it was just like, hey, here's this random Japanese fan that came all the way across the country to watch some boring-ass studio squashes. All right, dude. Whatever floats your boat. So then Tully and Arn were at the booth for a promo. Oh, God damn it, Tully. This guy is so mentally checked out, it's not even funny. Dude. I don't know what the hell happened. This guy was a hell of a promo like 2 or 3 years ago. And since that point, his promos have completely fallen off the map. I can't even begin to describe what he was yammering about. Probably because even Tully had no idea what he was yammering about. He basically said that Bobby Eaton was lying when he claimed that the Horsemen attacked him in the locker room. In actuality, it was just Tully and Arn. It had to be that way, because Flair and Wyndham were nowhere to be seen. And obviously, there can't be 9 people attacking Bobby all at once, because there aren't 9 Horsemen. The math does not add up. Seriously, I had no idea what the fuck he was trying to say. But then he just kind of stopped his promo cold turkey so Arn could take over. And that saved it a little bit. He essentially told Bobby that he got what was coming to him, saying he was unprepared as a champion because he let his guard down. That's why the Horsemen have always stayed on top, because they constantly keep their head on a swivel. At some point, he went on a tangent about the Horsemen being accused of a lot of horrible shit in the business, to which he says, it's like cheating on your wife. If you're going to get blamed for it anyway, go ahead and do it. What's stopping you? You know, the man's got a point. Then he had some obscure analogy about dogs getting run over by Mercedes cars or something like that. I have no idea what the fuck he was talking about. This is not the finest hour for the 4 Horsemen this week. And then Brad Armstrong wrestled another boring squash with Gary Phelps, which he eventually won with a Russian leg sweep. Then he cut an equally boring promo with David at ringside. I liked how David began his line of questioning by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, Brad Armstrong has arrived." Arrived? He's been here for well over 2 years, David. What in the hell are you talking about? Anyway, they recapped the angle at the top of the show with Al Perez and Gary Hart. Brad basically said that the only thing they proved is that they see him as a threat. He said they've also been going after Dusty Rhodes for eons now. So Big Dust needs some backup. Well, they can give Brad a call, because he's got nothing else going on, apparently. There was also a mention of a dog collar here. God, what is with these arbitrary phantom gimmicks that everybody keeps bringing up? You know, Ricky Morton's mentioning something about a Russian chain. Now Brad and David are talking about dog collars. Are we taping shit so out of order we can't even follow where we are in the timeline? I don't know what's going on. This show completely fell off the map following that Horsemen Midnight's material. Now, they did at least draw attention to the dog collar chain during Gary Hart's promo. Although at no point here did they mention who the alleged opponents were in this match, why they signed a dog collar match to begin with, or why this feud called for a dog collar match, period. The only thing I noted with Gary's dialogue is that he encouraged all the NWA fans to write to the TBS execs, stating their claim as to why Dusty should be banished from the sport of wrestling, because he apparently thought that idea would work. And then they aired a clip of something from the syndicated program. It was Hart, Sullivan, and Perez getting into a fight with Dusty. And the big angle was Sullivan driving the golden spike into Dusty's head, busting him open. A sign of things to come down the road when they tried the similar angle with Dusty and the Road Warriors. And that did not go over swimmingly with the network, as we found out. We did, however, get a fantastic fucking camera shot right before break. As Gary's wrapping up the segment and cutting the heel promo on Dusty, we see Kevin Sullivan start walking over to the camera and acting all deranged, barking and snarling at the camera lens. Meanwhile, David's standing there trying desperately not to break out laughing. It was so campy. Again, I still have no idea who the hell is partaking in this alleged dog collar match. Is it Dusty versus Sullivan? Dusty versus Perez? Is Gary Hart somehow going to be involved? I ain't got the first clue. But we do know there's a dog collar chain involved. And Dusty came out after a break to kind of put the finishing touches on it. First, he explained that Gary Hart's been trying to take out Dusty since Hacksaw Duggan. So that Gary's trying to come into Dusty's backyard, his home, his bed. Gross. Then he shifted gears and promised Kevin Sullivan that he would take that dog collar and choke the life out of him. He also referred to him here as that little devil, which I believe was a Dustyism when it came to any time he would mention Sullivan on camera. He'd always get in that line about him being that little devil. No mention of Al Perez here, by the way. So even Dusty, I think, gave up hope that that guy was ever going to amount to anything. Now the feud is primarily centered around Dusty Rhodes, Kevin Sullivan, and Gary Hart. Oh yeah, and he also mentioned Ronnie Garvin in passing. It was so fleeting, you'd almost presume they did it on purpose. Just to bury the guy outright and be like, yeah, that Ronnie Garvin's a piece of shit. But he's a thing of the past now. Now it's on to bigger and better things. Then we had Sting versus, as I wrote down, A Cruel Connection. Even though the graphic explicitly read Cruel Connection. Which member? Fuck if I know. I liked how JR and Tony had fun messing around with it too. JR goes, wait, Tony, is that Cruel Connection number 1 or number 2? Tony just responds, I have to wait for him to take off his cape. And when he does take off the cape, that is when Tony realizes, oh yeah, that's number 1. Definitely number 1. He actually sounded like Excalibur here. Like we the fans were idiots for not being able to identify which one of the fucking Cruel Connection members this was. As if it mattered. This actually ended up being far more entertaining than it had any right to be. Mainly thanks to the Cruel Connection guy being such a walking cartoon character. You know, Sting's in there just beating him up and messing around. Cruel Connection guys overselling to a ridiculous degree. And like every so often, he'd get in some clean shots on the Stinger, but then Sting would shut him down like a second later, and then it was back to cartoon selling again. I like the spot where Connection number 1 tried to climb up the ropes using his feet to break a Nelson lock hold. Sting just dropped the guy right on the back of his head. He eventually won with the Scorpion. Now I'm kind of hoping next week we have Sting wrestle the other Cruel Connection member. It's a mini TV feud where Sting is taking out all the interchangeable mass jobbers. That's how he's building his momentum to challenge Barry for the U.S. heavyweight title. And then he did the best promo on the entire show, just acting like a complete whack job. His whole shtick here is that he was whispering because he didn't want to scare Barry. If he yells and he goes all crazy, then it might frighten Barry and it'll send him cowering in fear. So Sting has to whisper and he has to be really calm as he tells Barry that he's gunning for the U.S. title. To which the payoff at the end is him howling into the microphone as loud as humanly possible, scaring the shit out of David Crockett in the process, which he did laugh about. Sting also at one point pointed to one of the fans in the front row and said, "We'll talk about you later." I had no earthly idea who he was referencing or what he was trying to get at. Considering the amount of soft murmuring going on here, I'm thinking the Stinger had a little bit of pre-studio fun this week before his match. I smell a ring rat in the Atlanta TBS studios. This is awesome. He was so great, dude. I love Sting. Easily among my all-time favorites. I mean, my favorite gimmick incarnation is still Crow Sting. But man, the more I watch of Surfer Sting again, the more he's starting to catch up with late 90s version of Sting. I don't think I really appreciated just how great the original Sting gimmick was, right before he got all depressed and gothic during the height of the Monday Night Wars. But he was so incredibly great during this early run. Then we had Lex Luger and his wife beater in jeans coming out to do a promo. And it was every boring Luger monologue on Ric Flair we've heard for the last year. And you will be shocked to hear, yes, he removed his shirt It gets less over as the weeks go by. Just like Luger himself gets less and less over as the weeks go by. And then Dr. Death wrestled the Menace. He did some moves, a couple football tackles, and then one with the Oklahoma Stampede. Horsemen promo. Actually, it was just a Ric Flair promo. I don't know why I wrote down Horsemen promo. Well, anyway. First, he admonished David Crockett for giving him a terrible introduction. Then he talked about how last year he netted about $2 million and that he did not need to practice law or run for president to make that happen. Nor did he have to run a major global corporation. The only thing he had to do was be the best wrestler in the world. By the way, on the president topic, he did say here, that was next on the agenda. I can only hope he was kidding. God help the people that would have voted him into office had he actually been on the ballot. It was an election year after all. So Flair spent a few minutes running down all of his accolades, as he's prone to do. The big thing was him calling out Luger, saying he's incapable of selling Flair on the idea that he's in the same class of all-time greats. Because even though Luger excelled at football and became a household name, he knows people are always asking him in the locker room, did you catch that Ric Flair match on TBS? Or did you see Flair beat so-and-so? And when it comes down to the core issue, the money, the fame, and the fortune, they all pale in comparison to Flair's baby, the World's Heavyweight Championship. 20 pounds of gold, 40 grand. He will not let Luger take his baby away from him. Because it's more than just a belt. It's Flair's livelihood. It's everything he fought for in the sport for 9 years to stay on top of the industry. And, you know, some Flair touched on during this promo here really kind of hit home afterwards. You know, the idea that they had all these regional world titles, certain guys walking around claiming that they're the world champion of this territory or that territory, it really goes to show just how much they protected the legacy of world titles back in the day. Like, this was an actual stable piece of Flair's career. The world's heavyweight title, it wasn't just a prop for him. When you think about the legacy of that belt, what's the first name you think of? Besides Hunter, I guess. It's Flair. Like, you can actually tell that he wanted to be the world champion. And that he actually saw this belt as the be-all, end-all. You know, it really goes to show how much championships have been devalued over the years. Like, come on, let's be serious. By today's standards, does it really matter who the hell the world champion is? I get the whole finish the story thing with Cody Rhodes. They built up to that for 2 years. But at the end of the day, you know, you look at the fact that the company still recognizes that there are two major world champions. I mean, they've neutered the meaning of titles anyway with all the hot-shotting and worthless belt changes over the years. I mean, if you really think about it, this truly is like the last real era in wrestling where belts actually had value. Before they were just seen as props to all the modern promoters and bookers. It really is kind of sad. So then we had our obligatory, oh yeah, that guy's still around match. Jimmy Garvin wrestled Agent Steel. He won with a brainbuster in 2 minutes. I can't be the only one that forgot Gorgeous Jimmy is still around, right? Him and Precious. It is a very weird transition period we're about to enter as we approach the Turner sale. So many of those top names that were around in 86 and 87, the Garvins, Jimmy Valiant, Ivan Koloff, Nikita. I mean, they've all got like one foot out the door at this point. So with the remaining airtime we had left, Mike Rotunda had a TV title match with, swear to God, not making this name up, Eddie Sweat. Eddie Sweat. God, I'm sure he was. Man, with a body like that, sweating looked to be a feature of Eddie's character. How do you even joke about it? It is so patently intentional. They let this guy out there with that name. Did not even try to convince him that, maybe we should go with a different ring name. They just said, Eddie Sweat. That is a great name, brother. Have fun. As if Mike Rotunda was not going to purposefully fuck around with the guy. So, Rotunda beat him up for a while and then won with the underhook suplex. It was not like that Rick Steiner match. Significantly less brutal. Probably because he was wrestling Mike Rotunda and not Rick Steiner. Oh, dude, Rick would have fucking killed this guy. Kevin Sullivan, too. You know this is going to be a Don Valentine story. I promise you, the next time we see Eddie Sweat on television, he's either going to be wrestling Rick Steiner or Kevin Sullivan. One of the two. He's going to get roped into having to wrestle the wrong guy, and that'll be the end of him. So we did wrap up with the Rotunda Sullivan interview. Barely wrote anything down here. They did not say anything important. Rotunda called out Dr. Death, made fun of Oklahoma. He said he wants his next title defense to be in New York. As one singular fan in the crowd marked out and went, "Yeah, New York!" That was kind of funny, I have to admit. And then Sullivan talked about the $10,000 bounty or whatever it was. It is part of the stipulation in the Rotunda Dr. Death TV match. Okay. And then he called out Dusty. And they walked off. They must have been getting the Iggy from the camera guy. Wrap it up, gents. Yeah, like I said a while ago, this show completely went off the rails following that Midnight's promo. Hour 2 was reverting right back to 1988 Crockett TV formula. Nothing but boring squashes and lame duck promo segments. Like I said, the first half of the show was like rewatching an episode from early 88 or early 86. I don't know what the hell happened here. It is sad, though, to see the direction we're heading into the fall season because, they really gave you hope and promise with that Midnight's Horsemen feud that they were starting off. And just as they were getting to the big part of it, just when everybody was waiting to see the blow-off, Tully and Arn are gone. Just like that. Within the next month. And now the Midnights are babyfaces with no definitive direction. That is until Paul E shows up. But they're not even hinting at anything like that by this point. But fuck, what a great promo that was. That was an A+ babyface promo with D- follow-up. To no fault of Jimmy Stan or Bobby. It was all Tully and Arn's fault. Thinking the grass would be greener up north. Boy, were they chastened. suitably. So I have a question. Are we just not acknowledging Magnum TA and Hacksaw Duggan as the Mid-South Tag Champions anymore? Is that no longer a thing? Not that I have an issue with it, but it just seems very odd that they've separated those two as a team with no explanation. And now Magnum is teaming with Dr. Death Steve Williams. Meanwhile, Duggan's off doing his own thing with Akbar and the rest of his crew. I honestly cannot tell you who the current Mid-South Tag Champions are at the moment. If Magnum and Duggan did drop the straps, they have been utterly silent about it. It was something I was thinking of when Boyd was running down the card this week. And he mentioned that Magnum and Dr. Death were going to be teaming up again. They've just completely glossed over that Magnum-Duggan pairing. It was kind of funny, too. Right as they're pitching to the first match, JR saying that it should be a super exciting bout. And we see Boris Zurkov standing there, set to do battle with Hacksaw Duggan. I was like, in what world did Jim Ross actually think a Boris Zurkov match would be both super and exciting? I regret to inform you, this was neither super nor exciting. Now, there was a central story they were working here. After last week's heat angle where Duggan was viciously attacked by Kamala and Akbar, Duggan was out there wrestling this week pretty banged up. And oddly enough, Duggan working at 50% was still better than Zurkov at 100%. But he was selling the rib injury. That was the open target for Zurkov to work that over for a bit. Of course, Duggan still won. But they're getting the idea across that it's been over a week now. Duggan still has not fully recovered from the attack. Now he's basically leaving himself prone for another assault as he continues to go around selling the ribs. So, maybe Duggan came back a little too soon. Guess we'll see how Akbar responds. That took us to Kamala versus Randy Barber, which I can basically sum up in 2 bullet points. Kamala did some chops, then he won with a big splash. The running joke with many Kamala squashes is that it takes more time for Friday to remove all of his headpiece gear than it does for Kamala to wrestle the actual match. Seriously, though, that's all there was to say about it. They are definitely taking their time building to that moment where Hacksaw finally gets his hands on Akbar. From there, we had Hacksaw Butch Reed getting a quick win over Josh Stroud. But prior to that, they re-aired the videotape from last week's Duggan Reed non-title bout. And we touched on the angle where Duggan was laid out by Kamala and Akbar. That was all an extension to the post-match here, following the Duggan Reed match. Because again, to reiterate, the stipulation was that if Duggan could score a win over Reed, he would get 5 minutes alone with Akbar in the ring to do whatever he wanted to him. As crude as that sounds, I think you know what I'm getting at. And even though Duggan did beat Reed via disqualification, by the time they came back from break, and Akbar was still in the ring, Duggan had already been carted off. He was unable to stand on his own feet. Kamala had laid waste to him with all those splashes and rendered the poor guy unconscious. So Duggan could not get those 5 minutes alone with Akbar. And that was where they left off this week. Like I said a minute ago, they're taking their time building to that blow-off where Duggan finally gets revenge on both Kamala and General Skandar Akbar. Still recovering from that brutal onslaught, though. In terms of the match here, not much to it. They worked a fun sequence at the beginning where Reed kept trying to do amateur takedowns to Stroud, but Stroud would keep countering and finding ways to escape Reed's holds, and that got him mad. At one point here, Reed was applying a front facelock on Stroud, pulling him down to the mat. JR casually chimes in and goes, "That's a fun move to try in your living room." No. Do not try this. Do not give your younger brother a front facelock on your hardwood floor in your living room. Terrible advice from Jim Ross. So after Reed spent a few minutes beating him up, he eventually won by press slamming Stroud directly on the back of his head, which did not look fun. So we learned two valuable lessons here. Do not try amateur takedowns in your living room, and don't press slam people onto the back of their heads. Imperative life lessons that you do not learn in school. And that took us to Ted DiBiase and King Kong Bundy versus Dr. Death and Magnum TA. This is so fucking awesome. So after I don't know, 10 months, the Mid-South officials finally put their heads together and said, "You know that Ted DiBiase has a knack of hiding gimmicks in his glove. Maybe we ought to check him out before the match and make sure he's not concealing anything." So right before they ring the bell, Johnny Martinez comes out with Ricky Ferrara, and they try to check DiBiase for a hidden gimmick. Of course, DiBiase immediately knows he's fucked. So he calls Akbar back out so he can let Akbar reach into the back of his trunks. DiBiase's just standing there like, nothing conspicuous about this. He's just giving me the old reach around here. So that part was awesome. Even JR, the babyface commentator, has to go, "Now my eyes may be playing tricks on me here, but it definitely looked like Akbar was pulling something out of DiBiase's tights." Nothing gets by you, Jim. Now this is kind of cool because, there's actually history here between Bundy and Dr. Death. Remember, Dr. Death got a visual pin on Bundy about a month ago. But of course, Bundy tried to complain about the call and say it was a 3 count and not a 5 count, therefore it shouldn't count in the record books. But those two definitely have some bad blood. Dr. Death being the first guy in Mid-South to actually have Bundy's shoulders pinned down for a visual 3. I mean, there were so many great moments in this match. I mean, when you consider that both Magnum and Dr. Death were so green by this point, I mean, they really held their own against DiBiase and Bundy. Magnum was a phenomenal house of fire at the end. Dr. Death's face-off with Bundy in the early goings was fantastic. They had the story going where the heels isolated Dr. Death for a while. Constant in and out tags from the heels, trying to prevent Steve from getting over to his corner. Magnum makes the valiant comeback toward the end. And when things break down with all 4 guys, you see General Akbar edging closer to the ring, trying to pass the loaded gimmick off to Ted. And he does initially clock Magnum over the head with it. But right as he goes to toss the gimmick out to Akbar, Hacksaw Duggan runs in from behind and intercepts the pass. And as he's chasing Akbar around the ring, right before Duggan heads off to the back, he goes over and cold cocks DiBiase right in the side of the head. Crowd goes ballistic for it. Magnum covers for the pin. What a great segment. And again, Duggan gets a little bit of revenge on the heels after last week's assault, but he does not get physical with Akbar here. Closest he got was chasing him around the ring for a few seconds. So they're still milking that big moment down the road. Really good stuff. And then somehow, as God is my witness, we actually had a decent missing link squash. Of course, they put him in there with Mike Jackson, of all people. And Jackson was solely responsible for carrying the workload. But hey, compliment's a compliment. Best missing link squash I've seen in 3 years of reviewing any of his content. Jackson threw everything at Link he could muster up. Drop kicks, springboard crossbodies, the whole 9 yards. Still not enough to keep the big man down. But it was the closest anybody's come to keeping Link off of his feet for more than 15% of the match. Jackson ended up getting faked out at the end when he missed a diving cross. Link dropped a middle rope headbutt and followed it up with a second headbutt for the win. We did also have a very funny moment here where Link went to throw a hissy fit on the floor. He went out to try to grab a chair in the front row. There were actually a handful of people that fled the scene. So, I mean, you can't say Link's gimmick didn't scare at least a handful of the Mid-South fans. Some tells me they were more scared of watching Barry Darsow wrestle in Daisy Dukes. But we already made fun of that last week. I think we actually got some insight here about Darsow that we did not get last week. Jim Ross mentioned that Darsow had walked away from wrestling for a few years to become a bouncer. Then when he saw the competition in Mid-South, he decided to jump back on the bandwagon. I cannot confirm. I do not proclaim to be a wrestling expert. I do believe I read somewhere that Barry Darsow was in fact a bouncer at one point in his life. So maybe that wasn't all just kayfabe. I mean, short shorts or not, I wouldn't fuck with the guy. He's big, mean, and ugly. Horrible combination. Anyway, he beat Tim Horner here in like 90 seconds. Submitted him with a Canadian backbreaker. Really nothing to say about it. And then we had a 6-man tag with Rip Rogers, Doug Vines, and Mike McGee against George Weingroff, Art Cruz, and Johnny Rich. Translation, take every last remaining enhancement guy we had on the roster this week and stick them all in a match. That's pretty much what they did here. But you know, this was really fun too. This would have been the perfect pay-per-view opener on a big show if you were trying to establish a lot of your prelim guys. Give them like 5 to 8 minutes to go out there, work a basic babyface heel tag match, spotlight as many guys as you can, and put the babyfaces over. I mean, the worst worker of the bunch was Mike McGee, but he was only in there for a couple minutes. He also ate the pin, which helped. But it was all action. Babyfaces were largely in control, all working very cohesively. And the deal at the end was Cruz getting the hot tag. The faces blistered Vines and Rogers on the apron to prevent them from breaking up a pin attempt. And as Cruz tagged in Johnny Rich, Cruz and Weingroff took out the other two heels again so Rich could cradle McGee and get the pin. I mean, they were down to the wire there at the end, so did not have a lot of time to work with. Again, though, I always talk about how I like when they give the prelim guys chances to shine. You know, they obviously have their place on the card when they're working with the bigger names. But once in a while, they get to go out there and actually showcase some of their stuff. And you actually see their growth and progression over time. I don't know if I agree with JR's notion here that all 6 of these guys would have become big stars. I mean, Rogers became a pretty big name by his own right. George Weingroff to an extent. Johnny Rich. The others, not so much. No offense to Mike McGee, but I did not see a lot of superstar potential there. I would definitely say this is a show where you can largely skip the first few matches and kind of start watching directly from the Magnum Dr. Death versus Bundy DiBiase match. The second half of the show is far better than the first half. It was a bit of a trudge getting through those early prelim squashes. But again, they're really building up that Duggan Akbar feud. Loved all the stuff they did with those two interacting this week. We're starting to see why Mid-South was catching fire here and became one of the hotter products around this time. The influx of all the new talent we're seeing. I think next week they said we're going to see the Road Warriors in action. The whole objective here is must-see television. And that's what Mid-South is slowly becoming, month by month. It's a can't-miss, must-see attraction. And granted, there's always going to be lulls here and there, but they always have at least one main story they focus on and kind of draw the entire show around it. And it keeps you glued. Really wanted to see what happens next. All right. Time for a rapid-fire world-class review. How short can I possibly make this? I'm going to shoot for 5 minutes. I think I need to install one of those timers on the screen. Of course, that'll require more editing on my part. So, never mind. Too much effort. We will stick with the 15-minute recap. Part of me actually wants to see if I can test myself someday. Actually blistered through a world-class review in under 5. Especially on the shows where there's nothing to talk about. Which is like, the vast majority of them. Although I shouldn't joke. This week there was definitely quite a bit to talk about. Especially when it came to Mike von Erich. We did have stuff to talk about in the 6-man feature with the Von Erichs and Gary Hart's crew. At a recent Fort Worth taping, the Hills retained their belts on a disqualification. I believe this was the first time the Von Erichs got their rematch since dropping the belts in the first go-around. And, I guess I could just skip to the end because that's where the important crap happens. I did want to single out a moment here that I thought was oddly humorous. The spot where Mark Lewin was grapevining the ring post like a gorilla, and the one-man gang and Tim Brooks are just kind of looking at him like, the fuck is this guy doing? I laughed. When Killer Tim Brooks and the one-man gang are weirded out by a guy's antics, that guy's got a few screws loose. There were actually large chunks in this match where Lewin just disappeared for like 2 minutes. He would walk off the ring apron or be doing something off camera that we couldn't see. He really wasn't active all that much here. There was also a brilliant line from Mark Lorenz on commentary after Lewin tagged in. This is an exact quote. I am not making this shit up. He goes, Lewin with a front face lock on Carey. Also, he's jerking him. I will not even dignify that with more elaboration. I'm just going to let that baby sit there and you be the judge of it. A front face lock, and he's jerking him. As long as Carey consents. So anyway, here's how the DQ went down, in case you were curious. Kevin gets the claw hold locked in on the gang. And of course, Gang pre-gigs himself, so he's gushing blood from the forehead. While Kevin has the hold applied, Mark Lewin just walks into the ring. He slaps a sleeper hold on Kevin. And Rick Hazard calls for the bell. That was it. That was the final decision that led to the disqualification. One of the heels entered the ring, and he attempted to stop the babyfaces from winning. Well, that just sounds like a foreign concept by today's standards. You mean a guy illegally got into the ring when he was not supposed to? And he was punished? Holy shit. What a novel concept. So, of course, everybody brawled afterwards. The heels threw a bunch of chairs in the ring, and that was pretty much all to the post-match. It wasn't horrible, but, with a spoiled finish in mind, you were pretty much tuned in to see how it would end. And it was a fairly lame DQ finish, if we're being blunt. So after break, we were back at the Sportatorium for John Tatum versus Brian Diaz. Tatum was introduced here with the pink around his neck. I presume Mark Lawrence meant the fur garb. He just said it with such disdain. Look at this fucking suspect sissy with a pig girly gimmick around his neck. What a dweeb. Oh, side note here. Also important to mention. During this match, Bill Mercer had mentioned that Mike von Erich was taken out at the hands of Gary Hart's team. So while he's out selling the beating, air quotes around the selling part, Bruiser Brody had been summoned to fill in for the upcoming six-man belts with the Von Erichs. And, at first, before the context, before they had aired the video where they explained what actually happened to Mike, I thought the whole thing was kayfabe. I even joked to myself about it. Now, why in the world would we want to injure Mike and remove him from the picture? Yeah, I haven't got the first clue. Well, it turns out there was more to the story, which I'll cover in just a minute. All in all, there was not a whole lot to say about this match. John Tatum tries every week to be Ric Flair, and it's just... no. Just no. He's still only slightly more charismatic than Brian Diaz. There were stalling tactics from Tatum early on to try to get the heat from the crowd. It's pretty basic as a match outline. Diaz sold for a bit, reversed a shoot-off attempt at the end, and then caught Tatum with a crossbody dive for the 3. I don't know if this was a title match or not. I don't think Lawrence said anything during the ring intros. Diaz should still be the Texas Heavyweight Champion. Unless there was a phantom title change off camera that was never explained. Would not be the first time they did that. Christ, they're doing it right now with the Magnum TA Hacksaw Duggan team. Moving on, though. We had a special sit-down with Mercer to explain more in depth what actually is going on with Mike von Erich. And again, this is where the historian part of my knowledge is fairly moot. How much of this is true versus what's a work? I think someone else would have to speak on that. I didn't have a whole lot of time to dive into this and try to find any articles or stories to confirm it. Here's the gist of what happened. So about a week ago, Mike had undergone shoulder surgery. And I'm pretty sure that was legit surgery, but they tried to work in the Gary Hart thing as a way to write him off TV. That's how they explained Bruiser Brody coming in. But while he was recovering in the hospital from his surgery, I think Bill said it was the very next day, he'd come down with a terrible fever, which put him back in the hospital. And while the doctors were running tests on him, they had determined that Mike had toxic shock syndrome, which for those that don't know, that's a life-threatening infection. Even Mercer explained here that had Mike's conditioning not been what it is, he may have not survived. It's like, God, you think of the Von Erich tragedy story and that whole timeline. And it's really sad when you realize that Mike only lives another couple of years before his suicide. And see, I had no idea about any of this. I can't imagine they're making up the story about the TSS. I mean, Bill Mercer, you could tell, legitimately got choked up trying to talk about that on camera. It was just one of those freak things where one thing led to another overnight. And I mean, are the surgeons responsible for it? Did someone fuck up in the operating room and accidentally inject a bacteria into Mike's body during shoulder surgery? Who knows? I mean, I certainly don't trust doctors as far as I can throw them. And they had one of Kevin's physicians talk more in detail about the fallout to it. I mean, even he seemed to be a little suspicious that the doctors may have transmitted something during the operation. But, Kevin was there to thank everybody and tell them to keep Mike in their thoughts and prayers. Letting us know to check the local media listings and see updates on Mike's recovery. You think about the Von Erich timeline around this point. They just lost David the year before. They almost lost Mike here in 85. Then they actually do lose him in 87. Not too long after that, Kerry's gone. I mean, obviously we know all about the Von Erich tragedy. There's been numerous books and documentaries done on all that stuff. Yeah, like I said, I had no memory of the Mike von Erich TSS story. That's a new one to me. I knew about the suicide story. I knew about the alcohol abuse and a lot of the mental issues he had dealt with over David's death. But the near-death experience right after surgery on the shoulder, I mean, what do you even say? It was a miracle of God he survived to begin with. So from there we go back to the ring for Chris Adams and Scott Casey, which is really difficult to get into, especially following the news about Mike. Again, it's one of those matches where the action's fine, but closing moments are where the bulk of the conversation comes in. I always do love it when the heels blatantly crack chairs over the baby faces and the referees just shrug it off. Like, oh well, it's on the floor, so guess we'll let it slide. Meanwhile, Mark Lewin gets disqualified for illegally entering the ring during a tag match. Anyway, the big spot at the end was Sunshine causing Chris to fall off by shaking the ropes. And while she ran the distraction, Gino hit the ring from the opposite end to help Chris gang up on Scott. To be frank, I have no idea what led to the Sunshine interference. There really didn't seem to be any particular spot that triggered her getting involved. She just kind of shook the ropes because Chris was going up for a top rope move. And then right as the heels tried to work their barbershop magic by cutting off some of Scott's hair, Sunshine ran back in with pepper spray and got the heels to bail. I liked how they didn't even bother selling it. They just turned around and walked out of the ring like nothing was being sprayed into their eyes. Defective pepper spray. I think they actually did get a lock of Scott's hair here too, so if he comes out next week with a buzz cut, we'll know what happened for sure. And then we had our final bout for the week. A bit of a tune-up here for Brody as he gets his chance to work with Gary Hart's team. It's Bruiser and the Iceman versus Gang and Mark Lewin. Our first look at Brody in the ring since his return. His Japan tour is over for the time being. Now he's back in Dallas to dismantle some bad guys. So, Well, there was a lot to say here. I had many thoughts running through my head as I was watching this match go down. Mainly me asking simple questions like, why was that not a DQ? Or why was that not a DQ? Multiple spots where guys are just coming in and out of the ring without tags. David Manning and Rick Hazard are both standing right there watching. They didn't seem to have a problem with it. Like, even Gary Hart had to warn his boys multiple times, watch the count. Which is great when David walked up to him at one point and said, shut up. Like, Gary's out there just calling spots for the boys, trying to guide his team along. David Manning was having none of it. He's like, Gary, shut up. That was pretty funny. How dare a manager try to help manage his team? Of course, there's no guiding or managing Mark Lewin, especially when he's running away from Brody or stalling on the floor forever. I did like Mercer letting us know Mark Lewin is well known for his intelligence. Oh, is he now? So again, there was a decent bit of stuff that happened amidst the action here. For the most part, it was the Iceman doing the bulk of the selling so Brody could eventually get the hot tag. At one point during the comeback, he visibly tripped over Lewin, who was just rolling around the ring mat. Thought the guy was going to get trampled to death. And, now they do the spot where Gang brings in a chair and tries to lay Brody on top of it so he can hit a big avalanche splash. But the Iceman comes in at the last second and pulls Brody out of the way so Gang eats shit. And then Brody unloads a couple chair shots on the Gang and Lewin. I mean, by that point, the match had already been thrown out. But they did disqualify Gang for bringing in the chair and body slamming Brody. They also had a little fight spill out to the floor after the fact. Like, Lewin and the Iceman are out there rolling around on concrete. Brody just walks in and starts teeing off on guys with the chair. Now, see, a lot of this actually looked and felt more like old school world class. The traditional angles we were used to seeing. Crowd going nuts for everything. You got the Iceman and Bruiser Brody, who are massively over as baby faces. I mean, Gary Hart's an established heel on TV. There's enough going on in the match where the people are engaged. And you still got the Mark Lewin problem where 99% of his offense is sloppy chops. Or him just getting in the way of everything. But aside from that, he's harmless enough. But I would say it was a fun way to end the program. Yeah, it's another DQ finish on a show filled with nothing but fucked finishes left and right. If you're somebody that likes frequent clean finishes, you'd have hated virtually every match on the card this week. It was definitely a roller coaster ride, though. The Mike von Erich thing is the centerpiece of a lot of the conversation, and that was pretty substantial news. All of which happened within a week's time span. The potentially botched surgery, TSS, the multiple hospital visits. I mean, I talked about it before. Can only imagine what the rest of the family was going through around that time. But it's a miracle Mike survived that. I have my own opinions of Mike von Erich as a wrestler. I certainly would never wish ill on the guy. I know he probably felt the pressure of trying to fill David's shoes and become that next generational talent, the youngest of the brothers. I know Kevin Carey and Fritz pushed him real hard. Probably a little too hard. But it's another omen of things to come down the road as we look over the next year or two. Just in a matter of a couple years. We're going to be losing another Von Erich family member to a terribly tragic death. It's a shame. Not to try to end the podcast on a dour note, but hey, sometimes that happens, you know? So again, we'll catch you guys on Monday for whatever this WWE Premium Live special is. And we also have Retro NXT. I think we got at least 2 more weeks before the TakeOver special too. So, yeah, relatively low-key weekend, but hey, I'll take it. Still kind of a busy time of year for me, so I don't have a whole lot of time to myself. My Fridays are completely shot right now, so that doesn't help. In any case, thanks for watching, people, and I'll catch you all soon. Hopefully next time I'll have some more energy, and I promise I won't drink a beer beforehand, because I'm kind of buzzed. But take care. Peace out.